Today, we're making a Spider-Man mask from Spider-Man No Way Home. This video is sponsored by Keeps. Hey, what's up? Sean here. This is the first Spider-Man mask I ever made. And this is my most recent mask. I think it's fair to say that I've improved quite a bit since making the first mask, so in this video I want to share everything I've learned, all the new methods, techniques, tips, and tricks, and if you're looking to make your own Spider-Man mask at home, then maybe this video can help you. In this video, you are going to learn how to make a professional looking face shell just like this, along with a pair of lenses to match the face shell, and of course a fabric mask with that beautiful three-dimensional dotted texture that we've seen on a lot of the Tom Holland suits in the MCU. In case you're wondering, no, I did not individually puff paint each dot one by one, nor did I use a screen printing machine to achieve this texture. Instead, I think I came up with a relatively simple solution to get this dotted texture that is going to be pretty accessible for most people. First, I created a Pepakura face shell modeled after the mask from No Way Home. Now this, I believe, is a set photo from Spider-Man Far From Home, but I think the mask used in both movies are the same, as far as I'm concerned at least. To print the template, you'll first need to download Adobe Acrobat Reader, which is free and takes like 2 minutes. And after you've downloaded the template, just right-click on the file, go to Adobe Acrobat Reader DC, then hit the printer icon. Select the poster format, set the overlap to 0, and right here where it says tile scale is where you're going to adjust the size of the mask. So just take the width of your head, divide that by 160 and multiply that by 100, and whatever number you get is what you're going to input as the tile scale. Finally, specify what type of paper you're using. In my case, it's US letter size, and then you can hit print. The template will look something like this, and as you can see, there's a border that we need to trim off before we can connect all the edges together. So just take a knife and a straight edge and cut all those edges off, and now all the template pages should line up perfectly. Now I'm going to transfer the template to a piece of dollar store poster board, and since I printed the template at 100% scale, my template came out as 4 pieces of paper, but you may have more than 4 pages depending on what size you print the template at. I cut all the pieces out using a sharp hobby knife, but you can also use scissors if you prefer. In total, there should be 4 pieces, as you can see. Now you'll notice that every piece is marked with these dashed lines right here, and those are basically meant to show you where to fold. So wherever you see one of those dashed lines, you just want to score it with a knife, and that will basically relax the cardboard and make it easier to crease. Go ahead and do that for all 4 pieces, and now we're ready to glue everything together. To make it easier to glue the pieces together, you can use some masking tape and just kind of temporarily tape the edges together like this while you apply some glue. This will really speed up the process because instead of having to hold the cardboard and wait for the glue to dry, you can just leave the tape on, and that will allow you to work much faster. Personally, my favorite kind of glue is super glue because it dries really fast and it's really strong, but of course it does kind of get all over your fingers and whatnot if you're not careful with it. So if you don't like super glue, you can also use hot glue for this, or pretty much any kind of glue you prefer. As you can see, the top of the head is quickly starting to take shape here, and we are almost done putting together this template. There's just one last piece to this template, which is this one right here. And this entire piece, once it's all folded and glued together, is going to make up the bottom half of the face around the jaw area. So we just take this jaw piece here and connect it to the top of the head like this, and there we have it. Unfortunately, this one was a little bit too small for my head though, so I had to start all over again, but this time I made everything just a little bit larger than before. Don't worry, this will probably not happen to you though, because in the template that I've given you, all of that error has already been accounted for, so as long as you follow the formula that I showed you earlier, you should be able to get it right the first time. Now, poster board is very flimsy, which is why the shape might get kind of distorted. As you can see, the shape is just way too ovular on mine. It looks kind of like a pill or something, but that's totally normal. All you have to do to fix that is just glue some temporary support structures in there. I'm using popsicle sticks for this, but you can use it with cardboard or whatever you have, really. Just something to keep it in its proper shape while we harden it. To harden this mask, I'm going to use fiberglass resin. If you're searching for this stuff in the store, it'll usually be in the automotive section. I got mine at Walmart, but it's a pretty common product, I think, and you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells automotive stuff. Basically, what this is a 2-part mixture, and the instructions on mine say to add 10 drops of hardener for every 30 milliliters of resin, so that's exactly what I did, and it worked perfectly. I did 1 coat on the inside and 1 coat on the outside. By the way, please wear a respirator and do this in a well-ventilated area when you're working working with this. The next step is to coat the entire inside of the mask with fiberglass cloth, which can also be found in the same aisle as the fiberglass resin. So what fiberglass cloth is going to do here is it's going to make the face shell very, very hard and rigid, but it's going to do so while still keeping the face shell relatively thin, which is exactly what we want, because the thinner the face shell is, the less noticeable it's going to be when you wear it. And once the fiberglass cloth hardens, it'll make the face shell rigid enough so that when you drill holes in the face shell for ventilation, the face shell is not going to become flimsy or fall apart. So this is perfect. In total, I think I did about 3 layers of fiberglass cloth, but before I did my last layer, I got rid of the supports so that I could cover those exposed areas. And here's where we're at now. At this point, we've got sort of the main structure down, but as you can see, this is still looking very, very rough. There's a lot of harsh edges that need to be refined. So in order to create a more like organic, smooth looking shape, I'm going to use some wood filler and just generously apply this stuff all over the mask until the whole thing is covered from top to bottom. If you want, you can also use something else like Bondo or spackling or pretty much any other kind of sandable filler there is, but for me, I went with wood filler because it's very, very cheap and non-toxic, and it also sands extremely easily, which gives me a lot of control over the shape of the face shell. The template I made is not perfect. There's a few little imperfections, like this little bump right here in the eye socket, as you can see. So I just sanded those down to a smooth curve like this. Once I was happy with the shape of the mask, I went ahead and drilled a whole bunch of ventilation holes, and that way it doesn't get as hot inside there when you're wearing it. It'll still get pretty hot, but not as much as if there were no holes. Then, using a craft knife, I just kind of cleaned up those holes to get rid of any of those excess strands hanging over the edge like this, and that will just kind of keep everything nice and neat and tidy. After that, I applied one more coat of fiberglass resin over the wood filler because the wood filler kind of has a crumbly, dusty texture that's unpleasant, so the resin will get rid of that texture. Once that dried, I added some padding to the inside using some craft foam, but you can basically put anything you have that's soft in there, like a sponge or cloth or something like that, just so that the shell doesn't press up against your face as harshly. Now we can move on to making the fabric mask. So for that, I found a pattern on Google Images. Now for some reason the pattern was cut off on the right hand side, so I just fixed that in Canva. And I made a PDF of this pattern that I left a link to in the description, so you're free to download that. And I printed it out the exact same way I printed the face shell template, again using that same formula. I've already showed that before, so I don't think I need to show it again. Once I printed the template, I cut off all the borders and connected all the pages together like one giant puzzle using a bit of tape to hold it together like this. Now this pattern was I think based on one of the older suits because the webbing lines are a bit different from the No Way Home mask. For example, these lines right here kind of taper in a bit too much, so I just did my best to redraw those lines, and I'll ignore the original lines. Also, there are these 14 little intersecting points right here that you should add as well, since those aren't on the template. And besides that, there are a ton of other subtle differences between this pattern and the No Way Home mask, but I didn't change anything else because that would have been too risky, and I just settled with what I had because this is close enough for me. Right here, I set my compass to 1/2 inch so that I could mark and cut the paper exactly 1/2 inch away from the edge of the webbing lines. And what that will do is make it easier for me to sew, basically. It'll be easier to pin 2 edges of fabric together because I'll know that the edge of the fabric will always be exactly 1/2 inch away from where I need to sew. After cutting out the paper template, I of course transferred that whole thing onto a piece of red stretchy fabric like this. Now it's time to trace all the webbing lines using 3-dimensional fabric paint. For this step, you'll need some kind of light source as well as a clear surface to work on, like this glass picture frame I have. Now this setup I have is pretty overkill though. I mean, you really don't necessarily need all this stuff. Just be resourceful and use what you have. Like, the cheapest way you could do this is just using the flashlight on your phone and just wrap some clear packing tape around a cardboard box, for example. I know that's not really as convenient, but it's definitely possible to do it that way. I mixed together some Tulip black matte puffy paint with some liquid latex. You should probably do like a 1 part liquid latex to 5 parts puffy paint mixture. This is personal preference, but I like to apply puffy paint with a pastry tip because the pressure is a little bit more consistent than a squeeze bottle, so it gives me a little bit more more control. You can use whatever you want though, but if you do end up using a pastry tip, you're going to need a very, very fine tip. This was the finest tip I could find on Amazon, so I'll leave a link below. As you can see, I'm skipping all the horizontal lines and I'm only going to do the vertical lines first. On the actual suit, I don't think the black webbing lines have this much volume. They're supposed to be like a lot flatter actually, and not only that, but if you look closely, you'll notice that the vertical lines also have varying widths too. So yeah, I think it's nearly impossible to achieve that level of accuracy using puffy paint. At least for me it is. So if you want that level of precision, you're kind of better off getting your fabric screen printed or something. But if not, puffy paint is kind of a quick and dirty way to do it. And as you can see, you can still get pretty decent results. You know, it's not perfect. And unlike screen printing, the puffy paint will inevitably break when it's that thin. But I did the best I could with what I had. Next up, we are going to do the dotted texture, but hold on. By now, you've probably already seen the new trailer for the upcoming Doctor Strange movie, and I don't know about you, but I was absolutely thrilled when Professor Xavier showed up.
We should tell him the truth.
Professor Xavier, I think we should tell you the truth, man. The truth is, you need Keeps, the sponsor of this video. If you don't want to end up bald like Professor Xavier, then look no further than Keeps, a subscription service that offers FDA-approved treatments for men to prevent hair loss. Now, if you're a young guy, I get it. Hair loss might be the last thing you're worried about. But did you know that 2 out of every 3 guys will experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35? My boy Andrew definitely did not survive that statistic. And don't even get me started with Toby. I love you, Toby, but you need some Keeps, man. In the past, you would have to go to the pharmacy to get this treatment, but now thanks to Keeps, you can create a custom treatment plan online, and you're able to connect with your prescribing doctor anytime with unlimited messaging. The best part is that everything is delivered straight to your door at about half the cost of traditional pharmacies. So what are you waiting for? Hair loss stops with Keeps. If you want 50% off your first order, just go to keeps.com/Sean'sCrafts or just click the first link in the description. Again, that's keeps.com/Sean'sCrafts. Now time to do the dotted texture on the fabric. I've seen a lot of Spider-Man cosplayers try to individually lay down each dot one by one. On the other hand, a lot of the more professional cosplayers will get this texture screen printed, which obviously yields the best results, but neither of these methods I want to do because they both have a high barrier to entry. So my solution was to stack 2 layers of perforated vinyl on top of each other and basically use this as a stencil for all the little tiny dots. Now, because the vinyl is a little bit flexible, it can be kind of tricky to get the holes to line up properly. As you can see, I'm clearly struggling here to get the holes to match. But what I found helps is if you're struggling to line up the holes, just kind of bend the vinyl a bit, and that will sort of offset the position of the holes, which can help you line everything up properly. If you're familiar with my past videos, then you've probably seen me use this material before, but in case you're not familiar with what perforated vinyl is, it's essentially just a giant sticker with a bunch of holes in it. I bought this on Amazon, so of course I'll make sure to leave some links down below to where you can find this. But all I'm doing is just simply transferring all those cutouts I just showed you a moment ago onto the vinyl. By the way, there should also be a piece of vinyl for the center right there, but I totally forgot about that while I was filming this. Now that I have all the vinyl stencils cut out, I can apply the fabric paint. I'm using Tulip Slick True Red for this, and this time we do not need to add any liquid latex to the puffy paint or anything, since the dots are so small and they don't need to stretch that much. Now, something kind of weird I discovered about Tulip Puffy Paint is that I think they have 2 different manufacturers, and the colors are actually not consistent between those 2 manufacturers. The way I found out is because I bought 2 different bottles of puffy paint. The one on the left says made in China, and the one on the right says made in USA, but particularly for this project, I would stay away from the one on the left because it's just kind of orange looking. So just something to look out for when it comes to puffy paint. Here's where we're at so far, and I think the dots turned out quite nice, all things considered. Now that I was done with the dotted texture, I went ahead and taped back together the template so that I could trace all the horizontal lines now. In order to make it easier for me to sew, I took a fine liner and just marked on the back of the fabric exactly where I needed to sew, and that way I could try to sew right up against that webbing line, which would sort of hide the seams and make them less noticeable. So here is how you assemble all these pieces together. First, you take this strip of fabric that goes right up top there like that. Of course, whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other side as well. Then you take this long edge right here and bring that down to the bottom. And then these two edges I'm showing you here are at the back of the head and are only going to be partially sewn together because I'm going to sew on an invisible zipper right at the back of the head there. And finally, this right here is the neck area, which is going to be kind of form-fitting over your neck, so that's why there has to be a seam right there. Now, I'm no expert in sewing. Pretty sure I've sewn less than like 5 things in my entire life, but I just do my best here to pin the fabric as precisely as I can and try to sew right up against that black line because that'll give the best results. In the description box below, I'll leave a link to a playlist I made that has a few sewing tutorials that were the most helpful for me for sewing this mask. I don't want this video to turn into a sewing tutorial and I barely know what I'm doing, so it's better if you just watch that playlist, so feel free to just check that out. It's in the description box below. For the lenses, I found this picture on Instagram and just made a PDF of that in Canva so that all of you could download and print it out for yourselves as well. The way you print out this template is almost the same as before, except this time you click size instead of poster and just print this lens template in the exact same scale that you printed the face shell template at, and that should do the trick. Now I can transfer this onto a piece of poster board. By the way, if you've made it this far into the video and you're enjoying it, please consider hitting the thumbs up button because that will help this video get recommended to more people, which helps keep this channel going. Alright, so now I'm going to take the paper pattern and divide that up into all the various different shutter pieces, then transfer that onto poster board as well. Really helps to use some tape to hold it down because these are really small pieces. Now what you need to keep in mind when doing this is wherever you see two edges that are overlapping each other, you need to make sure that you cut past the line, and that way you can actually layer the pieces on top of each other. So basically what's going to happen here is each piece that you glue down is being glued on top of the previous piece, kind of like this. And that is how you're going to get that kind of three-dimensional shutter effect on the lenses. Before you glue all those individual shutter pieces onto the lens, you should temporarily tape the lens to the face shell like this, so that it sort of matches the curve of the face. Reason being is if you try to glue all these pieces while everything is laying flat on the table, you might end up wrecking your lenses later on when you go to try to bend and curve the lenses to conform to the shape of the mask. So this is the best way to do it. Of course, I made one for the right side and one for the left side, and once I was happy with that, I coated the lenses in fiberglass resin. Keep the brush moving and don't let too much resin pool up in one place at a time. You want to make sure that you're applying a very thin coat that is mostly getting absorbed by the paper because you don't want any pooling to happen, or else that will ruin all your hard work. After I was able to remove the tape and all that stuff, I coated the rest of the lenses generously with more fiberglass resin. I quickly sanded, then coated the lenses in Duplicolor filler primer. I gave that a bit to dry and then sanded with some fine grit sandpaper, then did one more coat of filler primer. At this point, I buffed the surface with a clean towel to kind of get rid of as much texture as I possibly could, and then hit it with some Rust-Oleum black spray paint, followed by a satin clear coat. In order to make the lenses detachable, I'm going to use some 6x3 neodymium magnets. But before I can glue the magnets to the lenses, I just roughed up the surface a bit so that the glue would have something better to stick to. The magnets are glued to the lenses, so now we need to attach all the corresponding magnets to the face shell. So I used some binder board, but you can just use whatever material you want really for this. I just like binder board because it absorbs super glue really well and becomes really strong. To get the position of the magnets just right to where the lenses are flush with the face shell is just a bunch of trial and error, but once you figure it out, it's super satisfying and you get this really nice click when you insert the lenses into the face shell like this. Hey, future Sean here. So I actually ended up getting rid of one of the 4 magnets on each side because it was kind of pushing up against my face, which is not a good thing because, well, 1, it's uncomfortable, and 2, it also pushes the face shell further away from your face, which makes the overall mask bigger on your head, which you don't want. I didn't realize this before, but you should probably be more strategic about where you place these magnets. As you can see, there's plenty of negative room that you could place the magnets, so just pick a spot where you know that the magnets are not going to hit your face. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Back to the video. If you liked this video, then you'll probably like my previous video too, where I made a green goblin helmet, so click the screen right here if you want to watch that video. Thank you very much to my patrons for supporting me on Patreon, and thank you for watching.